Hi everyone, I'm Tom. This is Quick Watercolour Birds, and in this one we're taking a request for a really colourful fun one. Let's go. Hi guys, you'll have to forgive the slightly more informal intro here as I'm having a bit of a blip with my technology. I've recorded all of the actual painting, but my camera seems to want to take a break, so I'm just recording this intro on my phone. It's the painting that's the best bit, so I hope you can excuse this. What we're going to look at in this one is that I've got a long list of really lovely requests from all of you guys. We're going to be painting a Mandarin duck in this particular video, but I've got loads more to come. If you do have a bird that you would like me to paint, don't forget to pop it into the comments below. So again, we've got a bird that has a lot of colour to it, some really, really beautiful colours, but these colours are quite sort of separated. Some of them, we might want them to run together a little bit. With other ones though, we kind of want to keep them separate. We don't want certain colours to muddy other colours. So that's one of the big challenges here. It's going to be a basic process that you've seen me use loads of times, which is we're going to lay down a first wash, let the colours run together where we want them to, keep the other colours separate. We're going to let that dry off, and then we're going to look at adding those little bits of detail and some darker shadows, some darker accents over the top. Let's just get into it. Okay guys, so for the drawing and the painting, I am using A3 cold press paper and a 2H pencil to start to kind of map it in, ghost it in quite lightly. And then I go to an HB pencil to just kind of refine the drawing, sharpen it up and darken it enough for the actual painting stage. So as usual, I start with the two big shapes, so that being the head and the body, and just thinking of them as kind of overall shapes. You can start with them as an egg shape, or you can look at the shape a little bit more exactingly like I did. But the important thing here is proportion. So how big is the head? So how long is the head from front to back relative to how high it is from any mark point, anything that helps you work it out. But for me it was the bottom of the where the beak meets the head relative to how wide is it. Then how wide and how long and how deep is the body, using the head as a unit of measurement can be a really useful thing. Starting with big shapes, working to small shapes. So once we've got the big shapes, we then break it up into the smaller sections, slowly refining, slowly sharpening things. Don't be afraid to use sharp edges, and look for vertical and horizontal markers. So things like where is the forehead relative to the front of the chest, and little things like that. And just big to small, general to specific is always the rule to remember. Let's have a look at the painting. Alright guys, so that's the drawing done. I'm going to talk you quickly through the colours and we're going to dive into the painting. I'm going to use cobalt blue, so you could happily replace this with ultramarine. It just gives us a warmer, slightly more purpley blue. Really great colour. I'm also going to use phthalo blue, which is going to give us some of those more kind of turquoisey colours, and it's also going to give us a strength of dark that can be really useful. So we're going to go for two blues. I'm going to kick off just using one red, and it should be all I need, but we'll see how we get on. I'm going to use something called quinacridone scarlet. It's simply because I've got it and I want to use it up. You could happily use quinacridone red, you could use a magenta, you could use an alizarin crimson, you could probably even use something like pyrrole red in this case, because ultimately the red is going to have little bits of blue in it to kind of darken it down and cool it down. So let's go with the quinacridone red and see how we do. I'll talk about any other colours that I may introduce as I go, but I'm going to try and stick to this palette just for simplicity. Now, one of my favourite colours that I love using is, you've seen me use it before if you've seen my videos, it's called Aussie Red Gold and it's by Daniel Smith. It looks very dark, but actually when you start adding water to it, it's basically a lovely rich kind of earthy orange colour. You could very easily replace it with some sort of orange. Doesn't really matter too much because you could add a bit of red and create something very similar. You could even use raw sienna or burnt sienna and kind of mix in oranges and reds with it. I'm going to use a yellow called New Gamboge. Lovely kind of warm yellow. You could happily replace it with probably any other yellow, ideally a warm one, something like cadmium. I'm going to pop that there. And worth a mention, we've got this beautiful, beautiful bit of purple on the front chest here. I'm going to see if I can get it by mixing it. In theory, a cobalt blue with the quinacridone, so a warm blue and a cool red should give us a beautiful kind of violet colour. If I can't get the strength of purple that I want, I'm actually going to use something called quinacridone violet. But you can get tube purples, and if you haven't got a tube purple, like I said, a warm blue and a cool red, and you'll get a really beautiful purple, even if it's not quite that one. Those are my colours. Let's see how we do. Brush wise, I'm going to probably just stick with 2 brushes because we're dealing with quite small areas. A slightly larger brush, but not too large, that holds a good body of water and pigment, like this little size 0 mop. Great size for getting into all of these bits, but just big enough to be able to do some of the larger areas. I've got a size 8 here, round synthetic brush. You could use a size 10 as well. It's just for those extra sort of small details. It comes to a nice fine point. You could probably quite happily replace this particular mop with a slightly bigger one like this size 12 here, or just a standard round brush like this size 16 would also be a good one for it. I just happen to really like this brush at the moment. I may call upon these later, we'll have a see, but let's try and stick to just 2 brushes, keep it simple. Okay, so we're just going to get into this. One of the flip sides, the good sides, the pros of painting a bird that's so separated like this, is that we can actually just pick an area and just get into painting it. We don't have to worry about getting all the colours to flow together. I'll probably start with the larger area and a more muted colour, and we're just going to break it up into sections. So let's just look at this section here and look for roughly what it does. It's got a kind of yellowy feel to it, but it's not a bright yellow. So if we take a little bit of the new gamboge, pop in a tiny touch of red, is going to make it a little bit more orangey. And then the tiniest touch of blue is going to take kind of the heat out of the orange and just make it this lovely muted colour. It's almost like yellow ochre or raw sienna, and we've created it just from mixing our own version. So we're just going to get it in there, lots of water, keep it light. Remember that yellows in particular will dry ever so slightly, well, quite significantly, sorry, lighter than we might put them on. And then we can use the tip of this brush, comes to a lovely point just to get some nice fine marks. And then we're going to come into here, and we can worry about the black markings over the top later. We don't have to get those now. We can almost imagine the black is not on there and just look for the gentle gradient of this area. It also gets like a slightly softer bluey tinge at the top, which we can put in there, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. What we're just going to look for is that gentle gradient of colour, just letting the paint do its thing. And now we have just this lovely little puddle here, and we can mix a little bit heavier pigment. That's probably kind of tea consistency, maybe kind of milky coffee, but certainly no deeper than that. But this is kind of up to yeah, kind of milky coffee consistency now. So see how it's a little bit darker? It's got a little bit more substance to it. I'm working on a slight tilt, so it will bead at the bottom. And I'm kind of just playing around with the paint and trying to get some kind of variation of colour and tone in there. One thing I do need to make sure is that I go dark enough in this first coat. So let's go even more solid with the consistency of paint, just to make sure we do get a darkness to it. Same mix, just predominantly yellow, little bit of red, little bit of blue, gives us this lovely colour. And this is darker still. And this will look very dark, and I'm working into the wet wash, but it needs to be dark. I'd rather not have to go back and re-darken it and put on another layer later, so let's just keep it like that. So just take your time, have a bit of fun with it, have a play. We can always drop more dark into it before it dries, but let's tackle a different area. And if we get a bit of bleeding between areas, that's no bad thing if they're in the sort of the same ballpark of colour. So let's take our Aussie red gold and drop in a little bit of our quinacridone scarlet, and that's going to give us a slightly warmer colour, something more like burnt sienna. And we can now, just with a quick hits of the brush, we can just kind of get that in there, nice warm colour in there. There's areas of that warm colour that are darker, And look how that's just going to bleed ever so slightly into there, and it doesn't really matter too much. So the darker we want to go, the less water we're going to use. So quinacridone scarlet, a little bit heavier pigment and less water. So this is definitely into the double cream region here. And look how that gives us a lovely rich colour. If we want it a bit warmer, we just stick a bit more red in. There's a bit of residual paint in the brush, a bit of residual water in the brush, but nothing, it's not sopping wet. And this will give us a darker tone, and I'm just going to drop that into the edge there. So we're starting to look for kind of nice little gradients and just taking our time with it. Go a little bit darker in there. This little pool at the bottom here, if I'm not careful, will kind of balloon back into the wash. So when you get those little beads at the bottom, don't be afraid to go in and kind of pull them out. And that's a nice kind of simple start. I could come in and put in this lovely kind of purpley blue colour here, that's the white in shadow, but I'm just going to hold off doing that because I don't want that blue to shoot into all of these areas back here. So we're just going to keep it simple. Into this exact same mix, I'm just going to stick in some more blue, and what that's going to do is give us this lovely kind of greyish colour, and that's a perfect one for the back here. So now let's just do some simple fun brush strokes. Let the paint just do its thing. Don't be afraid to leave a few little white marks in places, and then that's it. Just let the paint do its thing. It's so much easier said than done. Just let the paint do its thing. I do know that, but if we can just kind of leave it alone. Let's take that same colour into there. It's a nice kind of neutral colour, and let's just hint at that wingtip kind of there. Keep it really simple, just simple marks. Let's warm that colour up by adding a little bit more red. Notice I'm mixing all my colours in this same spot at the moment, and I'm just saying, right, it needs to go a little bit more red, it needs to go a little bit more orangey, and we can just constantly move around. And I've only used so far the 4 colours of cobalt blue, quinacridone scarlet, a little bit of new gamboge, a little bit of the Aussie red gold, and it's just varying amounts of. So yeah, that's just a slightly warmer grey colour. It's a lovely soft colour, and I want that area to be quite light in there, and I don't mind if it kind of shoots into there. So if all of these colours kind of merge together, it's no bad thing. What I don't want is too much variation of water, because then we'll start to get cauliflowers, which aren't always a bad thing, but sometimes we just want to avoid them a little bit. And that's all kind of working, and we're still getting a flow of colour. It's all kind of tying together a little bit, but just not too much. We're not getting the colours completely shooting into each other. I do want to go a little bit darker in this area. Remember, the really deep darks are going to come later, so we don't need to go too dark, but I just want to drop a slightly denser pigment into there and let it just kind of bleed into there a little bit. Let's get everything kind of tying together just a little bit more. That's got a nice feel to it. The one thing I'm not going to tackle, as I said, is this area here. Not yet. So we've got this beautiful, beautiful bright orange colour here, and there's a shadow behind which I've not actually drawn in, and I'm going to forget about that if I don't draw it, because I'm always forgetting about things that I should put in but don't. So let's mix a bright orange colour. Basically going to be the pure Aussie red gold. So we're gonna, and there's little white tips which I don't know how we'll do that. We can either draw around them, nothing wrong with a bit of line, and use the brush to just suggest that they're there, and then look at that amazing bright orange that the Aussie red gold is. Bring it into here with nice simple brush strokes, kind of go around there, and it comes up into this lovely bit here, and just give a bit more shape. I don't really want to hit that because this is very watery and this is nearly dry. If I accidentally hit this bit with that bit that's got lots of water in, we're going to end up with some cauliflower. Sometimes a nice thing, sometimes not. So up here we use the background orange is going to go darker, so I'm actually going to paint in the background orange, but just remember that I'm going to trap a little bit of light up there, and again just in there, and then we can do what we want with that bit. Let's just keep it really simple like that. There's a lovely blue, so if I put the blue in now and the orange blends into it, they'll cancel each other out and we'll end up with a bit of mud in both of them. So those we're going to keep separate. What I will do is put in a slightly stronger pigment. That's kind of milky coffee consistency. If you're not sure what I'm talking about with the milky coffee in the tea, I'm not talking about the colour, I'm talking about the paint consistency, and I've got a bit more of a detailed video on that particular topic. It's on my channel, so you can have a little look for that. So the rest of it, we're really drifting into more muted colours and strong blues. The blues I'm going to deal with separately. Let's look at these this funny sort of slightly sludgy green colour on the back, and I've just stuck a bit of blue into the Aussie gold, and we're just going to hit this area here. So let's just have a little think about what's going on in this area, but nothing too strenuous. Don't want to think too hard. If that Aussie gold drifts into this green, I think that's going to be a nice thing. That's an area where I don't really mind a little bit of drifting of colour. And let's just get that shape right. Notice how I'm just focusing on the overall shape. The overall shape is important, much more so than the details, especially at this early stage. Just something like that. Keep it really simple. I don't want too much of a cauliflower there where those two colours meet, so I'm just going to suck that back out again with the tip of the brush and do something like that. And that's about it. We could drop in a little bit more stronger paint consistency, maybe like single cream consistency, so I'm simply adding more pigment to my mix and we'll get a slightly darker variation. And what I'm trying to do is create little gradations of colour within these separate areas. And we're getting some beautiful flowing colours in places and just letting the paint do its thing. Notice how I've laid it down and then very much just left it. I'm not going back in and I'm not working the paint. I'm not fussing around with it. We just lay it down, let it do its thing. Some people, you might get scared that that orange has run into this green, that they must be separate like the photo, but they don't have to be. Part of the joy of watercolour is actually when we get these colours blending together. Like a little bit of that green is drifting into this yellow. It doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal. The blue, as I said, is the colour that I want to keep separate. Okay, so for the first time we're going to go to a different part of the palette and I'm going to mix a more purpley colour, and we're now drifting into trying to get this lovely purple. Look at the purple that the cobalt blue, a warm blue, and the quinacridone red make. They make such a beautiful colour. Yeah, it's not exactly the colour that is in the photo, but that's okay. It's the colour that we're going to get in our painting with our particular colours. And just using quick hits of the brush, I'm going to go a little bit carefully here because I don't exactly know how I'm going to do the beak. I think the beak is going to be lighter than it is in the photo, and the purple is going to be darker than it is in the photo in order to make the beak kind of stand out a little bit. See how the red is not as red, the purple is not as reddy as it is in colour than in the photo. So I'm going to just drop some red in while it's still wet. And remember, this colour will dry lighter, so we're going to go up here and we're just going to trap a little bit of light just on there, just to give a little bit of interest of shape. And now I can just drop some more red in. I quite like the way the red is reacting with the blue there, so I'm doing what's called just loading the wash. I've got an existing wash. It's quite wet, I'd say very, very wet, and I'm dropping more red in that's a little bit more pigmented, and we're just going to again let the medium of the watercolour just do its thing, and we're going to use that to trap a little bit of light just there, and that's an important shape, just like that. And then we just let that colour again just do its thing. Let all the colour just do its thing. We're going to take that same kind of purple, and while I've got it on the brush, whoops, see how the yellow crept into it there, so it's gone a bit muddy. Keep it a clean purple. A bit more, there we go. And it can afford to go a little bit darker here, so we're going to link together this area now. I'm going to come into here with some nice simple brush strokes and start to get those markings on the front of the duck. and let's link together these shapes. So that shape is going to link into here, and it's going to come down into there. And we're starting to get those lovely markings. And again, we're just going to let that colour kind of bleed. I don't like the shape that I've created very much, and I want it to be a little bit more ready. And the back end of the shape there I didn't particularly like, so we're going to do something like that with it. And let's just soften that down, something like that. I'm making it more ready than it is in the photo, like more of a red colour, and I quite like that, so I'm just going to roll with it. Just see what happens. It doesn't, like I keep saying, it doesn't have to be like the photo. It can be your own thing. We use the photo as our guide. It gives us an idea of where to go. We can turn to it when we need more information. We're struggling to resolve an area and we sort of need more information, we can turn to our reference, but on the whole we can use it as a guide. I mean, you can copy it, you know, you can copy it very literally if you want to, but you don't have to. I think that's the important thing. I think people feel like they have to copy their reference photo to the T, and it's just not necessary, and it also takes a lot of the fun out of painting for me. You know, I like turning it into its own thing. Yeah, so that's kind of working in that area. I've not quite got the bold stripes that are in the photo, but again, it's not really suffering too much. But what I'm going to do, just to give a bit more hint of stripe up at the top there, I'm just going to pull some of the pigment out. And while it's wet, we can play around a little bit, but we need to be careful at this stage we don't start overworking the paint. I'm getting through the quinacridone red pretty fast here. We've got this lovely orange colour now, and it's got a bit more of a redness to it. I'm talking about the cheek area now. Whoops, see how the blue keeps creeping in? I just caught the blue with my brush then, and that's not what we want. So we go to a new area. We don't fuss about with that. Let's come back in here and just give it much more readiness. There we go. Keep the blue out of it. Okay, so we've got lovely colour in here, and I want this to quickly hit the purple. I don't mind if it hits the purple. I've got to be quick though. I was kind of dilly-dallied a little bit and lost the opportunity to get them to really flow together. Yeah, this area is proving a little bit tricky, but we'll just stick with it. Let's get a bit of texture using the side of the brush to get a little bit of texture, and then that becomes like a really lovely yellow colour. So if we get it well, quick, lovely yellow colour, and we're just going to bring that into here and then hit that orange and then tie it all together, and that yellow colour then comes up here, and now we can soften. So we've got a nice hard edge there. We're getting all of our colours flowing together. Now I've got a damp brush with clean water, and I'm going to come into the yellow that I just made, and we're going to get this lovely soft, gentle gradation. And then we're almost kind of blending here, for want of a better phrase. Getting a lovely soft blend, and it's a little bit darker than that, and I can afford to push it a little bit more to the greeny side, make it feel like it's a little bit more in shadow than I've got it. Always remembering about light and shadow as well. But I don't need to push it too much in shadow. We've just got a nice gradation, and then now we've got like this lovely unified wash, and I can start to just drop stronger colour into it while it's wet, and we'll start to get some really lovely things kind of happening. I'm taking a few liberties, just making up some of my own colours. I'm taking more of that orange into the face than there actually is. I'm going to create a darker version with much less water in it. So the quinacridone red with a little bit of the cobalt in, and that's going to give us a lovely dark kind of bottom area here, and get it while it's wet. And then in here is very dark, and it bleeds into the purple. kind of comes up doing something like that. And then just don't fiddle with it, just let that paint do its thing. We've got a bit of a funny shape going on here, so if I'm gonna touch anything, and I can do it because it's still wet. If it wasn't wet, then we'd be getting in trouble if I was going to go into this area and play with it, but we're okay. We're just going to let that colour flow together. It's a little bit not such a nice shape there, so while it's wet I'm just going to hit it and soften it all down, let it flow together a little bit more. That's better. Okay, now let's do the top bit. Let's come in with our quinacridone red, quinacridone scarlet, sorry, quinacridone scarlet, a little bit more, and we've got this lovely rich scarlet at the back there. For the first time we're going to use phthalo in a minute to get a really deep dark, but let's just focus on this back area for a moment. Bit of cobalt blue, bit of the quinacridone red. Let's get it all kind of flowing together, and we're just going to come in here and start getting a bit more shape into the back of the head here. Don't mind if some of that colour goes into there, but on the whole I want to trap the light on that front edge, and then we're going to bring the colour into it, down there and down there. Lovely colour. And then we're going to come in again, we're kind of back to purple, a little bit more cobalt blue needed. I'm just going to work around the bird like this. Let's go more cobalt blue, a bit more phthalo. Let's make it a stronger, richer blue. Trying to just shift the bias. There we go. That's the sort of thing we're after. And the red just meets the blue here, and it's going to give us a lovely dark. We want to go really dark in here while it's wet. Go really dark while it's wet. We're going to load this with darkness, and we're going to trap the light on the beak. Just going to push that darker and darker, that little shape in there. So while it's wet, this is when we can do, obviously, our wet into wet work. It's not sopping wet, it's just, it's got a lovely wetness to it. We can really start to make something of it. Okay, cobalt blue, we're going to come down into here. Nice simple marks, and just start to get the shape of this face, or the top of the head, sorry, the forehead in there. And it kind of hits the red there, and then it gets a little bit of light on it. Let's go back to our red and just drop a little bit more red in there, give it more of a purpley tinge, but let's reserve a few little lights on there and just do something like that. If it all gets a bit too heavy, just come in with your clean brush and just swipe through it, and it will lift out some of the pigment and start tying it all together a little bit more. You can do it at this stage when it's all still wet, and you'll create a lovely kind of gradation of colour. And now, much happier with that, we can take our phthalo blue, drop a bit of red in, and this will create a really deep dark, and we can just drop that dark in to a couple of places and start pushing that gradation and pushing that contrast. I've gone too heavy in this area and it's still wet, so I've got the luxury of being able to pull it out again, just like I did in the face. Go very gently because I don't want to muddy the paint, but we go a bit lighter in there. We're just going to pull out some of this pigment. It's a little bit risky because I don't want to muddy the paint, but we can go pick up some of our purple and just blend it back in. It's just a little bit risky this. When you're doing something like this, go carefully, but basically I went a bit too heavy in that area. I wasn't really a fan of it. We'll do more with it afterwards. Then the only thing left to do really is get in this kind of more electric phthalo blue, and that phthalo blue is sitting here, and we're going to keep it really light because we can also always go darker, and it kind of fades into being maybe a little bit more purpley here, so we could drop in a little bit of the cobalt, but only in that bottom corner here. There. And then the rest will come to life with the darks in the second half. And we're also going to come in here. This is still a bit damp, so I don't really want to hit it at the moment. So we're just going to work into this bit and this bit there. And maybe just leave it like that. That's a nice little mark. And this is a great stage to let it all dry off. Let it all just settle into itself, let it dry off. We've got a leg down there, which I completely forgot about. And I think we're just going to keep this fairly simple. I don't think we'll do much background with this one. What we might do is just get a nice simple leg colour on there, and we'll get maybe a shadow coming off the duck. Just nice and simple shape, and then we're going to feed that into like a shadow over there. And I think we'll go just drop a bit of colour into it, like a little bit of red into it, to be darker near the object that's casting it, which is in this case is the duck. Okay, so that's it. Don't judge it too harshly at this stage. I mean that about my own painting, but I also mean it about your own if you give this a go. This is just the first coat. It's the darks in the second stage that are going to really make this pop, really make it come to life. The main thing here is we want nice, simple, sectioned off areas with nice washes of colour and nice gradients. Not overworking it, not going too dark like I did there, and keeping it simple. That'll get you a long, long way. We're going to let this dry off completely, and then we're going to come back and we're going to finish it off. Notice how I've not even tackled the beak. I'm leaving that as its own kind of little isolated shape, which we're going to deal with later. So that's it guys, let's leave it there, let's let it dry. Okay guys, so it's as good as dried off. There's the odd bit that's still a little bit wet. And I love this stage because you can see how your washes have kind of settled down. As always, there's things that I might have done differently. That's totally normal. You know, I made a little bit of a fuss of this area, and it could have been done more simply, but actually I've ended up with a really beautiful gradient here that the paint has done. Very little to do with me, it's all about the paint. This could have gone darker, but I can make it darker in the second stage, although part of me kind of likes it. We'll just have to see how that goes. Got some beautiful flowing washes here, which I'm really happy with. On the whole, really pleased with it. I've managed to reserve lots of lights. So the big thing now is, where do we go from here? So I could start going in and fussing around with all the detail in here, of which there's lots. I want to keep this really loose, and I want to keep it really simple, and a lot of the joy of this painting is made in the first pass. To me, I always think, right, I could avoid doing the face for ages and then put it up on this pedestal, and when I get to it I make a big hash of it because I've thought about it too much and made too much of a big deal out of it. It's also the focal point, so I like to go first to the focal point. That's probably going to have the most amount of detail. It's probably going to have some of the trickier areas. So if I can just get that done, I find that I then tend to relax and be a little bit looser in other places if that's what I'm trying to achieve. So on that note, I'm going to dive into the face and see what I can do. The whole painting so far has been done with this size 0 mop. As I said, really lovely. Just to do a couple of parts of the face, especially in here, I'm going to come to my slightly smaller brush, and I'm always amazed at what a difference popping in the eye makes. So if we go with our phthalo blue, but we add a little bit of our quinacridone scarlet, which will take the edge off the phthalo blue and just give us a little dark. Tiny touch of water just to get it moving, maybe even a bit of yellow to make it a lovely neutral dark. I'll be doing a video very soon about creating darks with watercolour. And I'm just going to paint that eye shape in. And I tend to, and many people do, tend to overstate the eye. They tend to make it too big. This eye is actually quite small in the head, so I'm just going to really home in and just make it a really simple shape, but an accurate one. Get the brush to as fine a point as I can, maybe leave a little bit of a highlight in it, something like that. But that's it. I'm not going to do much more than that. I just want to neaten up the shape at the top there. Don't fuss with it, because the more you fuss with it, the bigger it gets. And that's not what we're after here. That's it. Eye in place. Done. Leave it alone. Especially for something at this scale and what we're trying to achieve. So what I'm going to be looking for here is they've got these beautiful markings on the cheek. Couldn't get anything close to that with watercolour in the way I work, so I always want to give a hint of what's going on. One of my favourite quotes from another artist, Joseph Sobukovich, is indicate, don't state, when we're kind of looking at this kind of way of working alla prima, sort of quick, reasonably loose watercolour. So what's actually going on around the eye? Well, there's a little dark shape here, and it comes round here and just does something like that. There's a reasonable amount of water in the brush, so it will dry lighter. You can always make yourself a kind of a lighter colour if you want, put a little bit more water in it, and we can always soften it down. But essentially there's this lovely little dark shape coming in there, and it does something sort of like that. And I'm just going to pop in a little bit more detail there, and I'm just going to pop in some nice simple lines, and then from there we can kind of come out into this area and create some stronger shadow. But I'm more interested in like the overall gradient than trying to give any of those markings particularly. So let's kind of come in there and create some lovely darks and just keep it really simple. It's so easy at this stage to start over fussing the paint. We're just going to sharpen up some of our details over the top. If you end up with a mark that's a little bit sharp and you want to soften it, just a nice clean brush, damp, and just hit the edge. Don't work the paint too much, just hit the edge. And if you want to load a bit more water into this new, a bit more pigment into this new wash, you can kind of do it like that. That's about as complicated as I want to make this area. In fact, I'm just going to simplify it right down to something like that. Really simple. I'm going to pull out a little bit of pigment from the eye. Just make it a bit of a softer eye. And you know, that's really it. There's a few bits to cast in shadow later on, and we could flick in with the smaller brush just a couple of little marks like that, which can really make quite a big difference to the feeling of form, because we're just getting a little bit more detail in there. And if there's anywhere we can kind of have detail, it's in the face. This white around the eye needs to be cast in shadow more, but now's not the time to do it. That's be something, a little detail right at the end. Here, I haven't really mentioned my colour mixing. It's because I'm just mixing a little bit of each primary to create some darker tones. Let's sharpen that. And that's it. You can see I'm already getting pulled into doing more detail than I should, but so much of that was captured in the initial stages that I don't really need to go back in and do much more. Let's get into the beak. I can see myself avoiding the beak for ages, and really it's not the right thing to do. I just need to get in there and get it done. We're going to keep it light on the front edge so that it shows up against the background, and we're going to go darker on the bottom edge so it shows up against the background. So we're going to operate two different things. There's a little nostril shape in there which we can kind of get, and we'll just paint around the nostril and do something like that. I'm going to keep it really simple, trap the light on the front. There's this lovely shape on the front of the beak, this kind of round shape like that, and that's all we're going to do. Possibly, no, that's not all we're going to do full stop, but that's what we're going to do to start with. Then I'm going to mix some of that quinacridone red. So that's kind of what I would call single cream consistency paint, maybe full fat milk, like milky tea. And then we're just going to run a little bit of a dark along the bottom edge to maybe bring it out from the background behind it. We've created a nice little wash. It's maybe a little bit weak in colour, so if we go back in with maybe like a double cream consistency, so far less water but still a little bit of water, so it kind of flows, and just drop a little bit of a stronger tone in there while it's wet and just think about some detail. And then we'll do a little bit of dry brush work right at the end to make it really pop. Look how much better it looks as soon as you put a little bit of gradient on it. Always just looks that little bit better. And this is also probably going to get cast in shadow just a little bit more, and there'll be a few little details, but that's kind of the front edge of the beak. You can always soften an edge if you're feeling that's a bit too hard, like that feels a bit too hard. I'm just going to come in and soften that edge, and it feels a bit more, feels a bit nicer. Just soften that edge with a damp brush. Feels a bit nicer. We've got some lovely dark shapes in here, and we're gonna get in and just make a bit more of those. And quite quickly I've done the harder bit, I would say, of the face. So we're gonna come in now and work a little bit more with some darker colours and just look for some nice simple shapes under the beak. And I'm back to my bigger brush, because that's gonna stop me from fussing about with detail, and it's gonna get me just kind of thinking, right, what do I need to do to finish this off? Let's just get it happening with some big bold brush strokes, and then we need to link those in just a little bit more with this, something like that. That's kind of working nicely. And again, we can soften over the top of our dry wash, so let's create a slightly more watery ready wash. And I just want to hit this edge here and just make it a bit more interesting. And maybe even get some markings coming up into there, just to break up that area a little bit more, make it a bit more interesting. And then we're going to come into the kind of the under area here. Again, like I said, it's a little bit lighter than I would have liked, so we're just going to come in and we're just going to hit it with nice big brush and some bigger marks. And like I said, as we move into this area away from the face, I feel like I can be a little bit more free with the brush, and we can maybe get the paint flowing a little bit more. We can even get some of that colour kind of flowing into that wash. So basically this is darks that we're putting on, darks and shadows. And some of these darks do something like this, and it's a great time to link our shapes together. So this dark kind of shoots under there and does something like that, and then kind of shoots under here and does something like that. And look how these darks instantly bring the painting together. So you're going to come in here with a lovely strong dark shape. Just something like that, really dead simple. Bit of dry brush work at the back just to give it a bit of texture. Keep pushing this a little bit darker in there. And what we're doing is creating smaller mini washes now. We're kind of starting generally with sort of single cream consistency, and then getting progressively deeper and darker with the mixture. And then here we can get into our markings just a little bit more. So notice I'm holding the brush just a little bit further down, and it gives me just a little bit more control, which is great. That's what we're kind of after. So let's mix a nice colour here. So if you want a deep dark, one way to do it is we take our phthalo blue, very greeny, mix it with some red. If it's a bit too purpley, add a little bit of yellow in, it cancels out the purple, and we end up with this lovely kind of neutral dark colour. I'm just going to pop on some of these darks and just simple markings. We're not after all of every single marking that is on this duck, we're after a kind of a hint of those markings. Now just a very, very simple muted colour. Look at how some of my colours are quite muddy, but that's kind of what we want. We're mixing kind of muddy colour in with more subdued colour. So now we can just, over the top of our lovely graded wash from earlier, we can now just get in some of these washes, just nice and simple. Link it all together will generally look that little bit better but we don't need straight lines around everything. Just kind of nice natural thing. Hard to explain, which just kind of use your brush in a very natural kind of way. Let the brush do a lot of the work for you. And then if you want to soften an edge, go in with your damp brush and just take it into the wash you've just created, and you'll get some lovely kind of interesting effects going on. Something like that, so kind of subdue it a little bit. Okay, and that, you know, we don't need to do any more than that. That for me is plenty. So now we want to get this lovely dark orange. So let's take our quinacridone red, mix it in with our Aussie red gold, and we get this lovely red orange, and this is the shadow bit in here. It's the orange in shadow, so it's lovely, lovely shape. It traps a little bit of light just on the front edge of that one, and then we come into here, just one nice single continuous wash into there, and into there. Nice simple brush strokes, something like that. And that's really all that's needed there. We don't need much more than that. And we're now into getting some darker washes on the go. So a little bit of cobalt blue into my red, and my yellow makes a nice neutral kind of shadow colour, and we're just going to bring that there and just there. Quick hits of the brush, nice cast shadow in there. That feather is also casting a shadow over this one, and we're just playing around with light and shadow a little bit, and we can just sort of take it into there and round there and over there. Just going to work your way around, sort of working out roughly what's going on with things as you go, and it's giving the illusion of kind of feathers cast in shadow. So this is very much watercolour. We start with our lighter washes representing on the whole the lights, and we generally stay away from going too dark too quickly, and now we're painting effectively the shadow over the top, and we just follow that process all the way around until we get our kind of nice finish. It's just a slightly different way of working than we've looked at in some of the other videos. In some ways it's a little bit more illustrative. There's kind of a mixture of loose washes mixed with kind of more illustrative brushwork in some ways, but it's just a different way of working, and a really fun way. It's just a different way of working. So again, we've got maybe this feather is casting a shadow on here, so it's the same kind of grubby mix, but I've just shifted the bias towards blue a little bit more, and we're going to just use the same approach of just laying in an initial kind of wash, and then we just have to decide whether that wash is going to be sharp or soft, and it's just going to be a little bit softer there. If we just hit it with the edge of the brush, we get a softer colour or softer edge. If we leave it kind of sharp like that, we'll obviously get a sharper edge, and it's that simple really. We come down into here, and I want to have some light kind of catching there, but the underside here is going to have a bit more to it, a bit more texture, a bit more shadow. And then we've got one final stage, which is to put on a little bit more dry brushwork. Let's link that together, and let's just tie it in a little bit more. Let's get a dark kind of linking that area together, and also this area here, so we get a nice little wet into wet flow. And we're not far off. We've basically got the dry brushwork to do over the top. So we could go a little bit darker in the corner of this wash over here. just in there we could go darker. Darker still. And just dropping it in, darker in there. And we're basically there, guys. There's a bit of there's some shadow to cover up, and I'm toying with the idea of chucking in a nice bit of background to trap some light on it. I was initially thinking no background, and now I'm thinking, I quite often think that and then end up putting some in. So let's see how we do. But first, we need to get rid of the white of the page in places. So let's go with a nice kind of shadowy cobalt blue. And that shadowy cobalt blue is a bit too watery as I just had it, so just take the edge off, and I just want to get rid of the white here. I want to cast it in shadow more. It'll give a stronger feeling of shadow. I want to cast it in shadow just at the bottom there. Doesn't look like much, but we're just doing a little bit more shadow in places. A bit of that cast in shadow. Just a bit more play of light and shadow. Maybe this is cast in shadow more. Definitely the underside of here cast in shadow more. So we're just going with our cobalt blue and just straight over the top, and then we'll get a nicer feeling of light on the whole. I'm not a huge fan of this area, so I'm going to come back in with some opaque Chinese white and just zip in a couple of marks to break it up. It's a bit of a splodge, for want of a better phrase, at the moment, and I'm not really a fan of the splodge, so we're going to get rid of it. Just want to do something back here which is giving the illusion of the white feathers but in shadow. Just something like that. And I think what I do want to do is pop in a background and get a little bit of opaque white in there, and then we're done. That's it. Some sort of simple, possibly even a bit more of a green tinge to the background, and we're just going to go for it. We're going to trap the light on the front of the head there, and this is a lovely vibrant colour. It's just going to come down to about there, and then we're going to keep it really dark. And it ties in nicely with the bird itself. You've seen me do, if you've watched my videos before, sorry, if some of you I imagine will have not done. Look at what a lovely dark, and for me these darks really throw out the bird. Don't be afraid to be big and bold with them, and bring it round the back, even if the back is already quite dark. Let's do something like that and throw it out, and then come up to the edge. Don't be afraid, don't leave a halo around the edge, that can look a bit strange. Do something like that. We don't have to be too precious about it. I might even dare to bring it this way a little bit and trap some light on the front of that orange bit there. And we're going to dig into the orange with the background. We can do that because it's very dark and it's dry. Well, the orange is dry already. And now what we do is we load that wash. We can soften edges if like that's a bit of a hard edge there, so we just soften it down. Let the paint do its thing. Don't worry too much about it. Get a bit of splattering happening. It's always going to liven the painting up a little bit. Let's soften that down. And then we get these little beads here, and it's a bit of an odd shape here, so actually I think I'm just going to bring it down to meet the bird. Don't always do this, but in this case I want it, and what it can do is trap just a little bit of light on the back of the bird there. We can play a bit more with the shape of the head then as well. So this wasn't necessarily planned at the start. Obviously, I think you heard me say I'm not sure if I put a background in, but I like the background. And for me it's made the whole painting actually work. It doesn't always need a background to work, but this one it just was lacking a little something, so I'm just going to put it in. And then we're going to go now with our phthalo blue and our new gamboge yellow, which is all that first mixture was that I've just laid down. We're just going to start playing around with the background and maybe push it a little bit darker in places. And we'll get some nice effects happening. As long as it's all still wet, we can just zip in all of these marks and they'll all kind of blend in and do lovely things. Just need to make sure this is definitely looking like it is the background and not the duck, so it needs to go darker. We need to get rid of that little white. Yeah, that kind of really does things, and we're getting an interesting kind of play of light and shadow as a result as well. Yeah, I think I like that. Just want to break this edge a little bit more. That's it. Okay, cool. You're getting a little bit of glare there from my lighting because I've not got it in a great place, but hopefully you kind of get the idea. Just tackle that there. Okay, there's a little bit of dry brush work to be done, and that's to push the darks a little bit darker, and I just want to finish off with that, breaking that up with some Chinese white, which is an opaque white. And there's a lot of talk, you know, not about using white in watercolour. I don't see any major problem with using white. You don't want to rely on it too heavily, I think is often the case. It can be very easy to rely on it too heavily, so just need to let this dry off a touch. Okay, so some dry brush work. It didn't really matter where we go. Phthalo blue with a little bit of our red, as I said, is going to give us a darker colour. And this is when we can just, I always think of it as like putting the final highlights on an oil painting. Sometimes these little dry brush marks, often, not always, but sometimes little details, maybe little dark accents, I find they can really bring the piece to life right at the end. And we're calling it dry brush because it's as it sounds. There's very little, if any, water in the brush, and it's great for doing these little marks. And this brush in particular, because it's quite small but it's quite lively, it's great for these sorts of marks. And we're effectively adding in a bit of sharpness in amongst it all, which I find really can help bring it to life. So, you know, do we want any darker tones in here? They're almost like little dark accents where things just push that little bit darker. Great for getting sharper marks in and really ramping the tone up a little bit. And we're just darker. There's a nice cast shadow there. Our cast shadows can be very sharp, something like that, and just darker in there. Nice little, just don't think about them too much, but do make them considered. And then just a Chinese white, and we've got it. Yeah, just a bit of Chinese white. This we can take straight out of the tube. Well, actually no, let's not do that. Let's mix it with a little bit of cobalt, because we don't want it to be bright white because it represents a shadow area. And what I really want to do is just break this area up. It's got to be nice, quick, simple marks with the Chinese white. It gives, with the cobalt, it gives this lovely blue colour, and look how it's just broken that area up. I think that was definitely the right thing to do, but notice how it's a quick brush stroke. It's not overly laboured, we're not working the paint heavily. And I think I want to take It almost just needs one more mark in there to break up the mass, but it's not going to be with the cobalt, it's going to be a little bit of Chinese white, and I'm just going to take my Aussie red gold and add it into the Chinese white. It will dry darker than you're putting it on, and I just want literally just one little mark in there. And apart from a signature, which I will do now, we've got it. So signature, we're just going to keep it simple. We've got a little cauliflower there, but if I go in and try and change it, it's going to make more of a mess than the background will just do by itself. So signature, we're just going to come nice and simple down here. So there we go, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the kind of longer format, real-time one. I know I've done some much quicker ones in the past and also some sped up ones, but I thought I'd just leave this one exactly as it is and kind of see how it goes down. There was a lot to kind of fit in within the hour, so hopefully you get a lot of information there. It was a really enjoyable process, and it was a result that I was really pleased with. There was a stage in the middle where I wasn't sure if I liked it and whether I wasn't sure whether it was going to work, and I can assure you that that happens in pretty much every single painting that I've ever done, and probably most paintings that most painters have done. So please don't worry about that stage. It's totally normal, and you just keep kind of following the process. Stick with it. As I said, really happy with the end result. If you want to see loads more videos, please do consider subscribing, and don't forget to hit the bell to be notified of when they actually come out. There's loads more to come of both these quick watercolour birds. Lots of requests from you guys. Don't forget to put the comments down below if you have one that you'd like to see. And there's also going to be lots more of the shorter quick tips watercolour videos that I've also been releasing as watercolour bites. And don't forget also, guys, if you're interested, I do also have a Patreon teaching channel. You can hop over there for loads of exclusive content, everything from weekly live streams, narrated time lapses, some big tutorials that are due out at certain parts throughout the month, and lots of other little kind of painting snippets, quick tips, time lapses, little just studio paintings that I choose to release over there. So I think it represents really good value for money, and if you're after some just a little bit more, I definitely consider hopping over there, and there's a tier for everyone, I think. So until next time, guys, happy living and happy painting, and I will catch you soon.